Laura did not know that freedom, once given away, can be the sharpest weapon a woman ever holds. She did not know that the Moon Covenant ceremony, celebrated across the Northern Territories as a night of renewal, would become the night the entire kingdom watched its foundation walk out through the cathedral doors. And she certainly did not know that the silver thread binding her soul to Alpha King Nieves for 7 winters was never a chain at all. It was a gift. A gift she was about to take back. All she felt, standing on the raised dais of the Ashwood Cathedral, was the cold press of 1,000 eyes and the low murmur of wolves who still believed they were about to witness a celebration. Candlelight climbed the stone pillars in restless orange ribbons. Banners of frost blue and pale gold hung from the rafters, each one stitched with the howling wolf crest of House Nieves. The scent of pine smoke, melted wax, and crushed winter roses hung heavy over the crowd, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, the perfume of ambition wearing a borrowed smile. Laura wore white that night, not the ceremonial silver the pack expected. Her hair, long and pale as frost on a window, fell over her shoulders in soft waves, crowned with a delicate circlet that caught the candlelight like scattered stars. Her face was calm. Too calm for a woman about to end the greatest bond of her life. Only her eyes, rimmed red from a private grief she had already finished crying, told the truth the rest of her refused to show. Beside her, Alpha King Nieves stood tall in black and silver armor trimmed with royal crimson, storm-gray eyes fixed somewhere past the crowd, past the wolves carved into the banners, past everything except the woman he had spent months learning to avoid. He did not know what Laura was about to do. Nobody did. Not even Janine, who stood among the noble houses in a gown of deep crimson, watching the ceremony with the practiced patience of someone who believed the ending had already been written in her favor. Laura lifted both hands and closed her fingers around the pendant resting at her throat, the sacred Luna emblem that marked her as Nieves's bonded mate. The cathedral quieted, expecting vows, expecting tears, expecting the same tired declarations of loyalty the pack had heard every year of their marriage. Instead, Laura unclasped the chain. She held it out toward Nieves, resting gently in her open palm, and said the only sentence the entire kingdom would repeat for years afterward. "I release you, Nieves. Go be free." Nieves went pale in a way armor could not hide. Somewhere near the front pew, Janine's confident smile faltered for the first time all evening, because a woman who plans a victory does not expect her rival to hand her the crown before the battle even begins. Chapter 1, A Marriage Built on Silence. 7 years earlier, Laura had walked into Nieves's territory as a stranger with nothing but a satchel and a mate bond neither of them had chosen. The bond had chosen them, the way it chose every Alpha and Luna since the first wolves knelt beneath the moon. Laura had been young then, hopeful in a quiet, stubborn way, and Nieves had been a new king still learning the weight of a crown he never asked to inherit. For a while, it worked. Laura learned the names of every village elder. She settled disputes between quarreling packs with patience Nieves lacked. Crops grew heavy under her care of the land, and the sacred wolves that guarded the northern woods came when she called, drawn to the warm, steady light the bond gave her. But somewhere between the 3rd winter and the 5th, Nieves began to change. He told himself it was the weight of leadership. He told himself the bond had simply cooled, the way all bonds eventually did. He never told himself the truth, which was that he had begun to resent the very thing that anchored him, because a king who is never given a choice will eventually mistake love for a cage, even when the cage was never locked. Janine arrived in the 3rd year of that resentment, sent from a neighboring pack as a political envoy. She was clever in a way that made men feel understood rather than manipulated. She listened to Nieves complain about duty and destiny, and instead of reminding him of his blessings, she agreed with every word, feeding the quiet bitterness until it grew roots. Laura noticed. Laura always noticed. She watched Nieves grow shorter with his answers, longer with his absences. She watched Janine's crimson gowns appear more often at council meetings that had nothing to do with her territory. She said nothing, because 7 years of loving a man teaches a woman patience even when patience becomes its own quiet wound. "You've been distant," Laura said one evening, finding Nieves alone on the east balcony overlooking the frozen training yards. "I have a kingdom to run," Nieves answered, not turning around. "You had a kingdom to run 5 years ago too. You still found time for me then." "Things change, Laura." "People change," she corrected softly. "Kingdoms don't. Bonds don't. Only the people inside them do." Nieves said nothing, and Laura walked away before her voice could betray the ache underneath her calm. Chapter 2, The Woman in Crimson. Janine understood something most rivals never grasp. She did not need to be more beautiful than Laura, or more clever, or more kind. She only needed to be present in the exact moments Laura was absent, offering Nieves the one thing his marriage no longer gave him without effort: agreement. "The council doubts you because they forget you are still young," Janine told him one night in the map room, her voice smooth as poured wine. Laura means well, but she was raised to serve, not to rule beside a king. There is a difference. Nieves frowned, though the frown did not reach his eyes the way it once would have when someone criticized his wife. "Laura built half of what this kingdom stands on. And you built the other half alone, while everyone credited the bond instead of you." Janine stepped closer, close enough that her perfume replaced the scent of parchment and ink. "Doesn't that ever tire you, Nieves? Being remembered as half of something instead of the whole?" It was a small poison, delivered slowly, and small poisons are the ones that work. Meanwhile, Laura kept the kingdom running with the quiet competence nobody thanked her for. She settled a grain dispute between two border villages. She sat with an elderly healer named Ethel, learning which herbs eased a difficult birth and which ones calmed a fevered child, because a Luna who only wears a crown and never learns her people is no Luna at all. "You look tired, my lady," Ethel said one afternoon, pressing a cup of chamomile into Laura's hands. "I'm not tired," Laura said. "I'm watching something I love disappear a little every day, and I don't know how to stop it." Ethel's eyes softened with the kind of understanding only older women carry. "Sometimes, child, you don't stop it. Sometimes you let it go, and you watch to see if it was ever truly yours to hold in the first place." Laura did not answer, but she carried those words with her for weeks, turning them over the way one turns over a stone looking for what lives underneath. Meanwhile, Nieves found himself standing at the edge of a decision he refused to name honestly, even to himself. He told the council Janine's counsel was useful for border relations. He told his personal guard, Daryl, that the extra meetings meant nothing beyond politics. Daryl, ever loyal but never blind, watched his king grow quieter around his own wife and louder around a woman who owed the kingdom nothing but favors. "You've been spending a great deal of time with the envoy, Your Majesty," Daryl said carefully one afternoon, walking the training yard beside Nieves. "She understands the pressure of ruling in ways Laura never had to," Nieves answered, a little too quickly. "With respect, sir, Laura has carried half this kingdom's burden since she arrived. She's simply carried them quietly enough that you stopped noticing." Nieves said nothing to that, though the words followed him longer than he wanted to admit, settling somewhere beneath his pride where he could not quite reach them to argue back. Chapter 3, What the Moon Already Knew. Few in the kingdom understood the true nature of the mate bond. To most wolves, it was romance sealed by fate. But the bond was older and stranger than romance. It was a covenant between the moon goddess and the pack, and Laura, as the bonded Luna, was the living conduit through which the goddess blessed the land. The crops, the wards, the strength of every warrior, all of it traced back to the silver light glowing faintly beneath Laura's skin whenever the moon rose full. Nieves knew this in theory. He had simply stopped believing it applied to him personally. He believed the kingdom's strength came from his leadership, his bloodline, his sword arm, forgetting that a king without the goddess's favor is only a man wearing a heavy hat. Fernandez, the eldest royal advisor, tried to warn him once, standing in the war room with maps spread across the table like old bones. Your Majesty, the bond is not decoration. If it weakens, the wards weaken. If it breaks, the goddess withdraws her blessing entirely. I have seen it happen in the southern kingdoms. It does not end quickly, and it does not end kindly. The bond is fine, Nieves said, though even he did not sound convinced. Is it? Fernandez asked, not unkindly. Or have you simply stopped looking? Nieves left the war room without answering, because some questions are easier to walk away from than to face. Laura, unaware of the exact warning Fernandez had given, felt the truth of it anyway, deep in the marrow of her bones. She felt Nieves pulling away not just from her, but from the bond itself, and with it, she felt something in the land grow thinner, like a blanket stretched too far over a bed too wide. She made her decision on a quiet night beneath a waning moon, alone in the garden where wildflowers still bloomed despite the cold. She would not beg a man to stay who had already left in every way that mattered except the paperwork of a crown. She would give him back the one thing he seemed to want more than her. His freedom. Chapter 4, The Ceremony. The Moon Covenant ceremony arrived with banners and feasting and the particular nervous energy that comes before any event the whole kingdom has been told to celebrate. Janine wore her crimson gown with the confidence of a woman who believed the night would end with Nieves finally choosing her openly, freeing himself from a marriage she had spent years quietly dismantling. She never imagined Laura would be the one to end it first. When Laura unclasped the Luna pendant and placed it gently into Nieves's hand, the cathedral did not erupt into gasps immediately. It took a full, suspended moment for the meaning to settle over 3,000 wolves at once. Then the whispers began, rolling backward through the crowd like a wave finding the shore. I release you, Nieves, Laura repeated, steady even as her voice trembled at the edges. You have spent years wishing fate had never chosen us. Tonight, fate no longer has to answer for that. I do. Nieves stared at the pendant in his palm as though it had turned to a burning coal. Laura, wait. Don't, Laura said, gentle but final. Not here. Not now. You wanted freedom. I am the only one who can actually give it to you. So take it. Nieves's hand closed around the pendant, knuckles pale, as murmurs turned to open whispers across the cathedral. Somewhere in the crowd, a child asked her mother why the Luna was crying while she smiled, and the mother had no answer good enough to give her. Laura let the silence stretch long enough for every wolf in that cathedral to feel its weight, then spoke again, quieter this time, meant only for the man standing beside her. You spent years wondering what your life would look like without a bond fate chose for you instead of you choosing it yourself. I'm not going to spend the rest of mine as the answer to a question you never wanted to ask out loud. Live the life you kept reaching for, Nieves. I hope it gives you everything you thought I was keeping from you. She turned, and for the first time in 7 years, walked away from her husband in front of the entire kingdom without looking back. Janine's smile in that moment was small and satisfied, the smile of a woman certain she had just watched her greatest obstacle remove itself from the board. She did not yet understand what every wolf bloodline older than her own ambition already knew. The goddess does not bless a broken promise. And a bond ended in dignity is not the same as a bond ended in betrayal. Chapter 5, The First Cracks. By the third morning after the ceremony, the northern wells ran cloudy. By the fifth, 3 sacred wolves that had guarded the palace gates since before Nieves was born vanished into the treeline and did not return. Farmers in the lower valley reported frost damage to crops that should have still been weeks from harvest season, damage that spread faster than any natural blight should move. Fernandez brought the reports to Nieves personally, laying them across the war table like a verdict already decided. This isn't coincidence, Your Majesty. It's early frost, Nieves said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. Early frost does not make sacred wolves abandon a 200-year post in the same week the Luna leaves the kingdom, Fernandez said. The bond is not just weakened. It is gone. And the goddess's blessing left with it. Nieves said nothing, staring instead at the empty space on the dais where Laura used to stand beside him during council sessions, a space that suddenly felt enormous in its absence. Janine, newly appointed as acting Luna by a council desperate to fill the void, quickly discovered that titles alone do not summon divine favor. She wore the crown Laura once wore, stood where Laura once stood, and felt nothing stir in response. No warmth. No light beneath her skin. No sacred wolves answering her call. Whatever the bond required, ambition alone could not manufacture it. "Why isn't it working?" she demanded of Reginald one night in her private chambers, her crimson composure finally cracking at the edges. Reginald, elegant and unreadable as always, poured 2 glasses of wine before answering. "Because the bond was never about the crown, my dear. It was about her. You wanted the throne. You never wanted the responsibility that came bound to it. Then what do we do? We wait," Reginald said, "for the king to realize what he lost. And when he does, we make sure he never gets the chance to fix it." Chapter 6, Exile. Laura did not run far. She had no desire to hide, only to breathe air that did not remind her of the husband who had stopped choosing her long before she stopped choosing him. She traveled south on foot, then by cart, until the borders of Nieves's territory faded behind pine ridges she had never crossed before. She was 3 days into unfamiliar land, exhausted and low on supplies, when a pack of rogue wolves caught her scent near a river crossing. She had no guard, no title that meant anything this far from home, only her own quiet strength and a dagger she barely knew how to use. She might not have survived the encounter if Eccleston had not arrived first. He moved through the rogues with the calm efficiency built from fighting far worse than hungry strays, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair damp with the effort, warm amber eyes scanning the clearing even as his hands remained steady on the hilt of his blade. When the last rogue fled into the trees, he turned to Laura, offering a hand instead of a demand. "You're a long way from anywhere safe," he said. "I'm aware," Laura answered, catching her breath. "You're also the missing Luna of House Nieves." It wasn't a question. News travels fast, even out here. Laura tensed, but Eccleston only sheathed his blade and gestured toward the trees. "My camp isn't far. You can rest there, or you can keep walking into rogue territory without a guard. Your choice. I'm not in the business of forcing anyone to accept help they didn't ask for." It was such a small sentence, but it landed heavier than he could have known. Laura had spent 7 years with a husband who rarely offered her a real choice about anything that mattered. She followed Eccleston into the trees, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, no one expected anything from her at all. The camp was modest, a ring of canvas tents beside a river that caught the moonlight in long silver ribbons. Eccleston's people, a small pack of warriors and healers who had left their old territory years earlier to build something quieter, greeted Laura with careful curiosity rather than reverence. Nobody bowed. Nobody addressed her by title. For the first evening in longer than she could count, Laura simply sat by a fire and listened to strangers talk about ordinary things, the price of grain, a wedding planned for the spring, a child learning to hunt. "You keep watching everyone like you're waiting to be told what to do," Eccleston observed, settling across the fire from her with 2 cups of something warm and spiced. "Habit," Laura admitted. "In the palace, someone always needed something from me." "Not here," Eccleston said simply, handing her the cup. "Here you can just be tired if you're tired. Nobody's going to hand you a crown and ask you to smile through it." Laura wrapped both hands around the warm cup and let herself, for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, simply breathe. "Why did you help me? You didn't know who I was until after the rogues ran. Would it have mattered if I had known first? For most people, it would have." Eccleston shrugged, the firelight catching the amber warmth in his eyes. "I don't help people because of what crown they wear or don't wear. I help because someone needed it and I was standing close enough to matter." You can stay as long as you need. No conditions attached. Laura studied him for a long moment, searching for the catch, the quiet expectation hiding underneath the kindness the way it always had with Nieves toward the end. She found none. It unsettled her more than she expected, the absence of a hidden price. Chapter 7, Something Like Peace. The days at the river camp settled into a rhythm Laura had not known she was starving for. She helped Ethel's counterpart among Eccleston's people gather herbs along the ridgeline. She taught 2 of the younger girls how to braid protective wards into their hair the way palace healers once taught her, a small piece of home she could still offer without expecting anything back. In the evenings, she sat with Eccleston by the river, watching the current carry moonlight downstream, and found she no longer counted the silences between them as something to fill. "You laugh differently now," Eccleston said one night, nearly 2 weeks into her stay. "The first evening, it sounded like you were apologizing for taking up space in it." "I probably was," Laura admitted. 7 years of making myself smaller so someone else's mood had room to breathe. It becomes a habit you don't notice until someone stops asking you to shrink. "I'm not asking you to do anything," Eccleston said, "except maybe eat before the stew goes cold. You've been staring at that fire for 20 minutes. Laura laughed, real and unguarded, and Eccleston watched her the way a man watches something he is careful not to frighten off. Neither of them said anything about the warmth building quietly between them, not yet, not while Laura's heart was still sorting grief from relief from a hope she was not ready to name. But it lived there anyway, patient, in the careful distance he kept and the way her eyes found him first whenever she entered a room full of strangers. One evening, caught in a sudden spring rain, they took shelter beneath the low branches of an old cedar, close enough that Laura could feel the warmth radiating from him even through the damp chill in the air. Eccleston did not move closer. He simply stood there, steady, letting her decide how much distance she wanted to keep or lose. "You're not going to say anything?" Laura asked quietly, rain sliding down the branches around them. "I've said everything I need to," Eccleston answered. "The rest is yours to decide, whenever you're ready to decide it." "I'm not in a hurry, Laura. I've watched what happens to people who get loved in a hurry. I'd rather wait for something real." Laura reached up, slow and certain, and rested her palm against the side of his face, feeling the warmth of him beneath her fingers. "What if I'm ready sooner than you think?" Eccleston's hand covered hers, gentle, grounding. "Then I suppose the rain picked a good night to fall." He kissed her softly, unhurried, the kind of kiss that asked rather than claimed, and Laura let herself lean into it without guilt, without the old habit of wondering what it would cost her. For the first time since the ceremony, she felt something in her chest settle instead of ache. Chapter 8, What Regret Looks Like. Nieves found her 2 weeks later, following rumors of a silver-haired woman who had helped a border village survive a harsh storm without asking for anything in return. He arrived at Eccleston's camp alone, without guards, without armor, dressed plainly enough that the villagers barely recognized their king. Laura stood by the fire when he approached, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You look well," Nieves finally said. "I am well," Laura answered. "Better than I've been in years, actually." Nieves lowered himself onto a fallen log across from her, his storm-gray eyes finally holding the weight they had avoided for so long. "The kingdom is falling apart, Laura. The wells, the crops, the wards. Fernandez says it's the bond. He says it's you." "It was never about me holding on too tight," Laura said quietly. "It was about you never realizing what you had until it was gone. That's not something I can fix by coming back, Nieves. That's something you have to fix in yourself." "I know that now," Nieves said, and for the first time, he sounded like it. "I let Janine convince me that loving you was a cage. I was wrong. You were never my cage. You were the only free thing in my entire life, and I was too much of a fool to see it until the wolves stopped coming when I called." Laura felt the old ache stir, soft and familiar, but she had learned something in her weeks away from the palace that she was not willing to unlearn. "I forgive you, Nieves. I do. But forgiveness and returning are not the same thing. I won't go back to being someone's convenient answer after being their forgotten question for years." Nieves nodded slowly, accepting an answer he had clearly hoped would be different. "Then I'll earn it. Not to bring you back. Just because it's the right thing to do." He left before sunset, and Laura watched him go with a strange, hollow kind of peace, the peace of a woman who has finally stopped waiting for someone else to decide her worth. Chapter 9, A Crown Bought in Blood. Nieves returned to the palace determined to undo the damage his pride had caused, and that determination frightened Janine more than his indifference ever had. A king trying to win back his Luna was a king who would eventually expose every quiet manipulation that had built Janine's position in his court. She met Reginald in the palace cellars that night, torches casting long shadows across old wine barrels. "He's changing his mind," Janine said. "If Laura returns, everything we've built collapses." "Then Laura cannot return," Reginald said simply. "And if the king insists on chasing her, perhaps the king should not survive the journey to find her." It was Reginald's steady hand that mixed the wolfsbane into Nieves's evening wine 3 nights later, disguised beneath the sharp taste of spiced cider the king favored during the colder months. Janine watched from across the hall as Nieves collapsed at the high table, the life leaving his storm-gray eyes before the healers could even reach him. By morning, the kingdom mourned a king, and Janine, dressed in mourning black that still somehow looked like victory, ensured the first accusation to leave her lips pointed south, toward the woman who had publicly humiliated the king only weeks before. She released him from the bond in front of everyone, Janine told the grieving council, her voice thick with practiced sorrow. She had every reason to want him gone for good. If you're loving this story so far, hit subscribe so you don't miss how it all unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello and find out just how far along our story is together. Chapter 10, The Hunt. Word reached Laura before the royal guards did, carried by a frightened messenger who had ridden through the night to warn her. Nieves was dead, and the kingdom had already decided, without trial or evidence, that Laura's hand had guided the poison. "You have to run," the messenger said, breathless. "They're saying you cursed him the night of the ceremony. They're saying the bond breaking was a death sentence you gave him on purpose." Laura felt the news land somewhere deep and quiet, grief and disbelief tangled together in a knot she had no time to untangle. She had forgiven Nieves. She had wanted him to live a full life, even one without her in it. The idea that her name would now be tied to his murder felt like a cruelty too specific to be coincidence. Eccleston did not hesitate. "You're staying here. I don't care what banners they're flying or what crown gave the order. Nobody hunts an innocent woman through my territory without answering to me first." "You barely know me," Laura said. "I know enough," Eccleston answered. "I know you helped rebuild a well for strangers who couldn't pay you. I know you never once asked me for protection, even when you clearly needed it. Whoever killed the king wanted someone else to carry the blame. I don't intend to let that someone be you." Daryl, once one of Nieves's most loyal royal guards, arrived that same week under the cover of darkness, having quietly slipped away from a palace he no longer trusted. "I don't believe you did this," Daryl said, kneeling briefly out of old habit before catching himself. "The wine that night. I saw Reginald near the king's cup before the feast even started. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I should have." "Then help me prove it," Laura said, steadying her voice even as her hands trembled. "Not for my sake. For the truth." Chapter 11, Threads of a Conspiracy. While Laura remained hidden under Eccleston's protection, a quiet network of allies began pulling at the threads Janine had spent years weaving. Fernandez, suspicious of how quickly Janine assumed control after the king's death, began reviewing old council records late into the night. William, a young palace scholar with a memory for detail most adults overlooked, noticed inconsistencies in the wine steward's reports from the week of the ceremony. The wolfsbane wasn't ordered through the royal apothecary, William told Fernandez, spreading ledgers across the table. It was purchased privately, through a merchant with ties to Lady Janine's original territory. Núñez, a veteran knight still loyal to the crown rather than to whoever currently wore it, began quietly questioning palace staff who had served the night of the king's death. Ethel, the healer who had once shared tea and honest words with Laura, remembered treating a kitchen servant for a burn the same night, a servant who mentioned seeing Lady Janine near the wine cellar long after she claimed to have already retired for the evening. Natalie, a sharp investigative scribe with a talent for moving unnoticed through court gossip, pieced together timelines from servants too afraid to speak openly but willing to whisper to someone they trusted. Ruby, young and fiercely loyal to Laura's memory, used her position among the noble houses to keep Janine's attention occupied while the others worked, flattering her with false admiration during long, tedious court appearances. Slowly, carefully, the truth assembled itself, piece by piece, the way truth eventually does when enough honest people refuse to stop looking. Ruby played her part with a lightness that hid how much courage it actually took. She attended every court gathering Janine hosted, complimented her gowns, laughed at her jokes, and asked innocent questions about palace history that kept the new queen comfortable and distracted while Natalie moved quietly through the servant halls collecting names willing to speak once they trusted they would not be punished for it. "You're better at this than I expected," Natalie told her one night, meeting in the shadow of the old library stacks. "I spent my whole childhood learning how to smile at people I didn't trust," Ruby said. "Turns out it's a useful skill for something other than surviving my mother's dinner parties." Fernandez, meanwhile, carried the heaviest burden of the group, standing in council meetings beside the very woman he suspected of murder, offering measured advice while quietly building a case strong enough that no one could later claim he had acted on rumor alone. Núñez trained new guards during the day and questioned old ones at night, gently, patiently, never pushing so hard that fear closed a mouth that might otherwise open. It took nearly 3 weeks before William found the final piece, a receipt tucked inside an old ledger that placed the wolfsbane purchase on the exact date Janine claimed to have been visiting a border village she had, according to Núñez's questioning of the royal escort, never actually traveled to that week. "She lied about where she was," William said, spreading the receipt and the escort statement side by side. "Which means she lied about everything else too." Fernandez studied both documents for a long moment before finally allowing himself something close to hope. "Then it's time we brought this before the council, before she has the chance to bury it any deeper." Chapter 12, Betrayal Meets Betrayal. Reginald had never intended to share power for long. As Janine tightened her grip on the throne, ruling through fear and a council too intimidated to challenge her, Reginald began to notice how easily she discussed removing anyone who questioned her, including, eventually, him. He found the private ledger in her chambers by accident, a list of names marked for quiet removal once her position solidified. His own name sat near the bottom, a footnote to her ambition rather than a partner in it. Reginald met Darrell at the edge of the eastern woods 3 nights later, a meeting neither of them expected to survive without consequence. "I helped her kill a king," Reginald admitted, his usual composure finally cracking under the weight of his own choices. "I told myself it was strategy. It was murder. And now she intends to bury me the same way once I've served my purpose." "Why tell me this now?" Darrell asked, hand still resting near his blade. "Because I would rather face justice with my name attached to the truth than disappear quietly as another one of her secrets," Reginald said. "Bring me before the council. I'll confess everything. Let Laura's name finally be clean." Chapter 13, Justice Returns to Ashwood. The council chamber had not seen a crowd this large since the coronation itself. Laura stood at the center, flanked by Eccleston, Darrell, Fernandez, and the others who had spent weeks assembling a truth the kingdom desperately needed to hear. Janine sat upon the throne she had claimed without ever earning it, crimson gown pristine, expression carefully composed even as Reginald was led into the chamber in chains. "Tell them," Darrell said quietly. Reginald lifted his chin, meeting Janine's furious glare without flinching. "I poisoned King Nieves on Lady Janine's order." She feared his reconciliation with Laura would end her claim to the throne. Every accusation made against Laura since his death was a lie constructed to protect that claim. The chamber erupted into noise, nobles rising from their seats, guards moving toward Janine before she could finish her denial. William laid the merchant ledgers across the council table. Natalie presented the timeline pieced together from frightened servants. Ethel confirmed the kitchen servant's account under oath. Nunez confirmed the movements of the royal guard that night, movements that placed Janine near the cellar exactly when the wine was tampered with. Janine's composure finally shattered. "I gave this kingdom the strength it needed after she abandoned it. I did what none of you had the courage to do." "You gave this kingdom nothing," Fernandez said, his voice heavy with old grief and quiet finality. "The wells did not clear. The wards did not strengthen. The wolves never returned to your call. Ambition without honesty is not strength, my lady. It is theft wearing a crown." Janine was removed from the chamber under guard, her crimson gown trailing behind her like the last act of a performance nobody believed in anymore. Reginald, having confessed fully, faced judgment of his own, a sentence tempered slightly by his willingness to expose the truth before it could bury someone innocent in his place. Chapter 14, What Freedom Actually Means. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Without a bonded Luna or a living king, the council turned to the old texts, seeking guidance from a goddess who had gone silent for months. Fernandez, poring over records older than the kingdom's current bloodline, found a passage few remembered existed. In rare cases, when a Luna's sacrifice came not from weakness but from genuine, selfless release, the goddess could choose to bless her independently, without requiring a mate bond at all. The wells began to clear the same week Laura returned to Ashwood, not as anyone's wife, not as anyone's convenient answer, but as herself. The sacred wolves that had abandoned the palace gates months earlier returned first to the Treeline, then, slowly, to her side, drawn to a light that had never actually needed Nieves's crown to shine. The council, humbled and grateful, offered Laura the throne outright, not as a widow inheriting a title, but as the first sovereign queen in the kingdom's long history, ruling in her own right, blessed by her own choices rather than borrowed authority. Eccleston stood at the edge of the crowd during her formal recognition, not pushing forward, not demanding a place beside her, simply present, the way he had always been since the day he found her by the river. "You don't have to stay," Laura told him quietly afterward, finding him near the palace gates as the celebration continued behind them. "I know," Eccleston said. "I'm not staying because I have to. I'm staying because for the first time in my life, I actually want to." Laura smiled, small and real, the kind of smile that had been missing from her face for longer than she cared to admit. "That's the difference, isn't it? Wanting instead of needing." "That's the whole difference," Eccleston agreed. Chapter 15, The Kingdom Learns Its Lesson. Ashwood rebuilt slowly, the way anything worth trusting again rebuilds, one honest season at a time. Laura ruled with the same patience she had always carried, but now it came paired with a boundary she had learned to hold, gently but firmly, without apology. Ruby became one of her closest advisors, her earlier flattery of Janine revealed as the clever loyalty it had always been. Natalie continued serving the crown, her sharp eyes now put toward protecting the truth rather than merely chasing it. Darrell was named head of the Royal Guard, a position he wore with the same quiet honor he had shown throughout the entire ordeal. William, still young, still curious, was given a permanent place among the royal advisors, his attention to detail having saved a kingdom from further ruin. Ethel remained the palace healer, and Nunez the steady hand training the next generation of loyal knights. Eccleston, in time, became more than a quiet presence at the edge of celebrations. He earned his place beside Laura the way the old text said a true bond should be earned, through respect freely given rather than fate assigned without consent, through choices made every single day rather than a single ceremony sealing two people together whether they still wanted each other or not. Ending, the lesson Ashwood never forgot. Years later, storytellers across the Northern Territory still told the tale of the Luna who gave her king his freedom, only to watch an entire kingdom collapse without her. But the wisest among them always added the part too many versions left out. Freedom given out of spite destroys everyone who touches it. Freedom given out of dignity, even when it costs everything, has a way of returning tenfold to the one brave enough to offer it first. Love, the storyteller said, was never meant to be a cage disguised as loyalty, nor a possession disguised as passion. Real love asked. Real love chose, again and again, without needing fate or a crown or a bond to force the choosing. And real strength, they said, was not found in holding on until your hands bled. It was found in knowing exactly when, and exactly how, to let go with your head held high. Laura herself, years later, was said to have told her own daughter something simpler than any storyteller's version. She sat with the child on the same balcony where she once asked a distant husband why he had grown so quiet, and she said the kind of thing only a woman who has survived heartbreak and rebuilt a kingdom could say with a straight face and a full heart. Never confuse someone needing you with someone choosing you, Laura told her. The first one will drain you slowly and call it love. The second one will stand beside you freely, even on the days you have nothing left to give, and call it partnership. Wait for the second one. Settle for nothing less, no matter how long the waiting takes. Here is what Ashwood carried forward, long after the crowns changed hands and the storytellers moved on to newer tales. They learned that silence is not peace. A marriage, a friendship, a kingdom, all of it rots quietly under the weight of unspoken resentment long before anyone notices the cracks in the walls. They learned that manipulation always wears a comfortable face. Janine never announced her ambition. She simply agreed with every bitterness Nieves already carried until the bitterness grew too large for him to see past it. They learned that dignity is its own quiet kind of power. Laura never begged, never schemed, never lowered herself to win a man who had already stopped choosing her. She simply let go, and the letting go became the very thing that saved her. They learned that truth takes time, but it rarely stays buried forever, especially when honest people are patient enough and brave enough to keep asking questions nobody wants answered. And they learned, above everything else, that real love never needs a bond, a title, or a crown to make it real. It only ever needed two people willing to choose each other, freely, again and again, on ordinary days as much as the extraordinary ones. That, more than any ceremony, was the freedom Laura truly gave away that night in the cathedral. And it was the very same freedom that eventually found its way back to her, on her own terms, in her own time, exactly the way it was always supposed to.